Thank you very much, President Pistello, members of the Board of Trustees, faculty, parents, Ms. Rosito, my fellow graduate, members of the class of 1961, and my soon-to-be fellow graduates of Moyne. I am deeply honored to be with you and to receive this degree. And first of all, congratulations to my fellow graduates of the class of 2011. Because not only were you accepted to a top-notch college, not only did you complete all of your academic requirements, not only did you do this at a prestigious Jesuit university, but you did so under 170 inches of snow last year. Now, since we're at a Jesuit commencement, let me begin with a parable. There's an interfaith gathering at Moyne, and all the participants, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, even agnostics and atheists, are on a lunch break. So they go to the caf and get food poisoning and die. They arrive at the gates of heaven, bummed out because, you know, they're dead, but happy because they're in heaven. And St. Peter comes to take care of business. So he turns to the Protestants and he says, "Hey, thanks for all of that great work you did in helping people learn the Bible and all those great hymns you wrote. Welcome to heaven. Why don't you go to room 5, but make sure not to look in room 1. So off they go. Then St. Peter says to the Jewish crowd, "Hey, thanks for keeping the covenant so faithfully and following all the commandments that God asked of you. Mazel tov. Welcome to heaven. Why don't you go to room 4, but don't look in room 1. Then he turns to the Muslims and he says, "Thank you for all of your daily prayers and your devout observances of all that the Quran taught. Welcome to heaven. You go to room 3, but make sure not to look into room 1. Finally, one of the agnostics, who's surprised to be there at all, says to St. Peter, "What's in room 1? And St. Peter says, "Oh, that's the Catholics. They think they're the only ones up here." Now, that's a true story. Now, you're probably wondering why you're spending the final few hours of your Moyne education listening to cheesy religious jokes. You're thinking that if you're going to go to the commencement address and get all dolled up in these caps and gowns, that at least there should be a point to this talk. Well, that is the point, which is this: lighten up. Don't take yourself so seriously. Or, since this is Moyne, a Jesuit college, and I should frame things more eloquently and more theologically, how about this? Joy, humor, and laughter are underappreciated virtues in the spiritual life and represent an essential element in one's own relationship to God. Now, it's not clear why it happened that humor and laughter have been deemed as inappropriate in so many religious settings. But I'm sure you've all met people who seem to think that being religious means being deadly serious all the time. But as the saying goes, when you're deadly serious, you're seriously dead. In Christian circles, those people are known as the frozen chosen. There are a host of reasons: sociological, theological, and even psychological, why humor is downplayed in religious circles. Take American Christianity, for example. Many Christians, even Catholics, I would suggest, still have a hard time imagining Jesus as someone who laughed and, God forbid, had fun. But he surely did. Anyone who told clever stories and amusing parables must have had a sense of humor, and so has God, who has sent this bee back to torment me. On the other hand, the sun came out, thank God. But think about Jesus. Anyone who told clever parables and stories must have had a sense of humor. But why don't we see this more in the Gospels? Why don't we think of Jesus as a funny guy? Well, one reason is that because we live in a different culture and time, we don't get some of the funny parts. Humor, as you know, is very culture-bound. It often doesn't translate from culture to culture. It's also time-bound. Check out a movie from the 1940s, and you'll see that some of the jokes simply fall flat. So if humor is culture-bound and time-bound, imagine how hard it is for 21st century Americans to appreciate jokes from, say, first century Palestine. Moreover, we've heard the funny stories so many times that they cease to amuse. In one gospel story, for example, a fellow named Nathaniel is told that the Messiah is from Nazareth. And Nathaniel says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" It's a little dig at Jesus' hometown, which was seen as a real backwater. It's kind of like saying, "Can anything good come from Syracuse?" It's a bit of a dig. But Christians have heard that story so many times that we miss the humor. We miss Nathaniel's humor. Reaching farther back, the Old Testament is filled with good humor, even with laughter. Remember the story of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham is like 1,000 years old, and Sarah is 900 years old because she married early. And they're visited by 3 strangers who tell them that Sarah is going to have a baby. Abraham, according to the book of Genesis, quote, falls on his face laughing. What a great image. And when Sarah overhears the news of her pregnancy, she laughs, and the bee is back again. Thank you, dear Lord. She laughs when she hears the story of her pregnancy. "Why did you laugh?" says God. "I didn't laugh," says Sarah. "Oh, yes, you did," says God in the book of Genesis. And when they have a son, they name him Isaac, or in Hebrew, Yitzhak, which means he laughs. And Sarah says in a wonderful line, "God has brought laughter, Yitzhak, into my life, and all will laugh with me." So there's a story at the beginning of the 3 great monotheistic religions that combines humor and holiness. Stories about the Christian saints and their humor reaches as far back as the early Roman martyrs. In the 3rd century, St. Lawrence, who was burned to death on a gridiron over hot coals, famously called out to his executioners, "Turn me over and take a bite. I'm done on this side." And in flawless Latin, no doubt. In the 4th century, St. Augustine prayed, "O Lord, give me chastity, but not yet." No comment. Saintly humor continues up until modern times. The most well-known contemporary example may be Pope John the 23rd, who served as Pope from 1958 to 1963. The Italian-born Pope, who used to describe himself as a peasant, had an earthy sense of humor. In the 1940s, when John was still an archbishop and the Vatican ambassador to France, he was at an elegant dinner party in Paris, seated across from a woman wearing a very low-cut dress that exposed a lot of cleavage. Maybe not that low-cut, it wasn't Lady Gaga there. Anyway, his secretary turned to him and said, "What a scandal!" And John said, "What's the scandal?" And his secretary said, "That woman! Everyone is looking at that woman and her dress." And John said, "No one is looking at that woman. Everyone is looking at me to see if I am looking at that woman." Joy is not incidental to the spiritual quest. It is vital. And that's not me talking. That's a rabbi, Rabbi Nachman, in the 17th century. And have you ever seen a talk by the Dalai Lama? It's filled with laughter and humor. His lectures are anathema to many serious-minded religious people today. Even Jesuits have to laugh at themselves. Yesterday, you heard at the baccalaureate twice St. Ignatius's famous words to St. Francis Xavier before he was about to take off for his travels, "Go and set the world on fire." Well, in the Jesuit headquarters in Rome, this is a true story, there is a huge statue of St. Ignatius with his arm up. And on the statue it says, "Go and set the world on fire." And right behind the statue, true story, is a fire extinguisher. In short, the great spiritual masters from every tradition knew the value of humor and of laughter. Let me give you just 3 brief reasons why. First of all, humor is a tool for humility. We can tell jokes about ourselves to deflate our egos, which is a good thing for everyone. Look, you're about to graduate from a Jesuit college. It's easy to get stuck up, right? It's easy to get stuck up in religious circles as well. Sometimes on the way out of church, people kiss my hand as they're leaving. The other day, a woman said to me, quote, "Seeing you celebrate Mass is like seeing Jesus celebrate Mass." I didn't ask her when the last time she saw Jesus celebrating Mass was. You know, the body of me. For example, that Catholic joke I told at the beginning is fun to tell. But jokes remind me that Catholics and all of us need to be careful about assuming they have all the answers. Jokes remind us not to take ourselves so seriously. They remind us of our essential humanity, what Jesus called in the Beatitudes our poverty of spirit. As a college graduate, you will probably go on to positions of prominence in the community, in the nation, and in the world. And you may be tempted to think that you're better than everyone else. Don't. We are all human beings. From the guy who cleans up the vomit in the toilets on the dorms on Sunday morning to the Pope. We are all beloved children of God, none of us better than the others. Laughing at ourselves helps to remind us of that. And that goes for people at the very top. Once, when John the 23rd was Pope, he got a letter from a little boy named Bruno. True story. "Dear Pope, I am undecided. I don't know if I want to be a policeman or a pope." This may be helpful career advice for you. "What do you think?" And Pope John wrote back, "My dear Bruno, if you want my opinion, learn to be a policeman, for that cannot be improvised. As regards being Pope, anybody can be the Pope. The proof is that I have become one. If you're ever in Rome, stop by, and I'll be glad to talk all this over with you." A second reason for humor in the religious sphere: humor speaks truth to power. A witty remark is a time-honored way to challenge the pompous, the puffed up, and the powerful. Jesus deployed humor in this way, exposing and challenging some of the arrogance of some religious authorities of his time. Humor is a weapon against the arrogance and pride that infects all human beings and infects religious institutions because they are made of human beings. The mother of a friend of mine, for example, was once in the hospital at the same time the local bishop was. Nowhere near here, by the way. The bishop took it upon himself, after his own operation, to go from room to room and visit all the patients. He came into my friend's mother's room and said to her, "Well, dear, I know just how you feel." And she said, "Really? When was your hysterectomy?" Later on, they became friends, and years later, he presided at her funeral mass and told that joke on himself. He had learned to take himself with not so much deadly seriousness. Finally, joy is an important part of our relationship with God. One of the best ways of thinking about a relationship with God is as a friendship. Like any friendship, for example, it requires time and attention. What kind of friend would you be if you never spent any one-on-one time with your friend? Well, that's what prayer is. Being in relation requires you to listen to God's presence in your daily life and in prayer. It requires you to be willing to deal with rocky times, times when you feel that your friend isn't there for you as much as you would like. All the things you can say about a good friendship, you can say about prayer. Now, you're all smart, Jesuit-educated graduates. You know where I'm going with this. Any good friendship is leavened with joy, humor, laughter. The same goes for our relationship with God. Think about incorporating lightheartedness into your spiritual life. After all, the book of Isaiah says, the Lord takes delight in his people. Can you imagine God delighting in you? If that doesn't work, how about this? How many times have you heard someone say, God loves you? You think, yeah, whatever. That's just what God does. It's like wallpaper. But how about this? God likes you. God likes you. Doesn't that have a different energy to it? Can you imagine God liking you? So, if you're a Catholic or a Christian or a religious person or a spiritual but not religious person, or if you're a seeker or a doubter or an agnostic or an atheist, here's some commencement advice. Don't take yourself so damn seriously. Laugh at yourself. Use some humor to speak truth to power, especially on behalf of the poor and the marginalized. See what happens when you incorporate joy into your spiritual life and try to locate God's delight. Overall, my fellow graduates, be joyful. Cultivate a sense of humor and laugh, for God's sakes. To that end, I will close with, what else? A joke. Why? Well, by now you know the better question is, why not? So a Jesuit priest and a Franciscan friar are en route to a spirituality course at Moyne, and they get into this long discussion about which religious order is better, and they get distracted, they swerve off the road, and they hit a telephone pole at Carrier Circle and go straight to heaven. So they find themselves there standing in front of the gates of heaven. And the Jesuit and the Franciscan are waiting for some time until finally the solid gold gates of heaven open up, which is true, they're actually solid gold. Oh, you laugh. I have an honorary degree now from Moyne. I know these things. Just then, a choir of angels starts singing all these songs. They start singing St. Louis Jesuit songs, which is what they sing in heaven. You laugh at that too. Wait till you get there and you find out. Except be not afraid, they don't sing that in heaven. So a long red carpet, longer than this green one, rolls all the way out to the foot of the Jesuit. And the Franciscan stands back. Suddenly, there's this big trumpet blast, and out come all these Jesuit saints. Saint Francis Xavier, Saint Aloysius Gonzaga, Saint Isaac Jogues, and finally Saint Ignatius Loyola himself, the founder of the Jesuits. And the Jesuit priest is just amazed. And Saint Ignatius greets the Jesuit and says, "Welcome to heaven, Father. Thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you for being such a good Jesuit." He can't believe it. Then there's this beautiful harp music, and out rolls a powder blue carpet. And out comes Mary, who's dressed in blue, which is what she wears on special occasions, which you know because you've seen the pictures. So all of the Jesuits fall to their knees and start saying the Hail Mary. Mary does not say that prayer because it's kind of an awkward prayer for her to say. You know, Hail me and all that. And the Blessed Mother walks out on the powder blue carpet, comes up to the Jesuit, kisses him on the head, and says, "Welcome to heaven. Thank you for being such a good Catholic." He can't believe it. Then this white carpet rolls out. There's a huge blast from the trumpets, and out comes Jesus Christ himself. The Jesuit can't believe it. He bursts into tears, and there's Jesus, who walks up to the carpet, walks to the Jesuit, bends over, hugs him, and says, "Thank you for being a good Christian. Welcome to heaven." Then there's a huge trumpet blast. The angels burst into song again, and the whole group hugs the Jesuit and claps him on the back, and they all go back in heaven laughing and singing St. Louis Jesuit songs. The gates close, and the Franciscan is there all by himself, and he's just amazed. So he's pretty excited now, wondering who's going to welcome him. Which Franciscan saints? Maybe St. Clare, who he loves so much. Maybe St. Anthony, and he can thank him for all those lost keys that he found. He starts to gather his thoughts and think about what he might want to say. After a half an hour passes, he starts to get a little antsy. Finally, an hour passes, 2 hours pass, and he's starting to get a little annoyed. Finally, a tiny little door opens, and a little teeny Franciscan saint, who he doesn't even recognize because, you know, there's so many Franciscan saints, comes out in a long brown robe and a little halo and says, "Hey, you." And the Franciscan looks around and he's looking for the carpets and maybe Mary and Jesus and some of the saints. And he walks over to the door and the little Franciscan saint says, "Yeah, welcome to heaven." And the Franciscan says, "Is that it?" And the little saint says, "What do you mean?" And the Franciscan says, "Oh, come on, are you kidding?" He says, "That's the crummy welcome I get?" He says, "After working so hard on earth and poverty and chastity and obedience, and I mean, the Jesuit gets the carpets and the angels and the trumpets and the saints and his founder and Mary and Jesus and all those nice words, and all I get is this?" And the little saint says, "Oh, yeah. Well, you have to remember something. We get Franciscans up here every day. We haven't had a Jesuit in 250 years. Thank you very much, and go Dolphins."